Hi, everyone, and welcome to Acumen's Webinar Wednesday. My name is Stephen Phelps, and I will be your host for today's webinar. In this session, we brought in the team from Ottimate to show you how their AP AI automation solution allows approvers, controllers, and CFOs to work through the entire invoice lifecycle. Before we begin, please note that today's webinar is in listen-only mode, so please use the chat option to write any questions, and we will answer near the end of the presentation. With that, let's get started and move on to the agenda. So to start off, we'll do some brief introductions with the Ottimate team and let you know how they are supporting the Sage ecosystem. From there, we'll dive deeper into the user experience and features before showing you a live demonstration and answering any questions near the end. One side note before I pass it on, whether you use Sage Intacct or Sage 300, Acumen has built in a seamless integration that allows you to connect to your Sage system. So with that in mind, I will now pass it on to Matt to begin the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction, Stephen. And hi, everyone. My name is Matt Wallach. I'm a partner manager here at Ottimate. Work closely with Stephen and the rest of the Acumen team to provide our joint clients the best possible AP automation solution. Additionally, on the call is Laura Moulton. She'll be running our demonstration later in this call. So just a little high-level overview, Ottimate and Acumen have been working closely together as partners since 2022. As Stephen mentioned, we saw a need to work closely together on developing integrations due to the growing client size of Sage users in the Ottimate client base. So to date, we have 56 clients currently on Sage and Ottimate, and that represents over 2,500 individual locations or entities across the United States. So a little bit of background on Ottimate. We were founded in 2014, specifically in the restaurants and hospitality industry. But since then, we actually rebranded from Plate IQ to Ottimate in December 2023, really as new industries were beginning to reach out to Ottimate about using us. We realized that we were more than just a hospitality and restaurant specific tool, and we could actually help our clients automate across many more industries. So to date, we have over 30,000 client locations across the United States. We process over 24 million invoices each year. That represents over $10 billion in payables. And we're constantly recognizing new vendors every day, and really proud of the fact that we process over 70,000 invoice pages every single day. And that's a testament to leaning on our software to be able to scale to those numbers. So as Stephen mentioned, Ottimate and Acumen have worked very closely together to provide the best possible seamless integrations for Sage Intacct and Sage 300 clients alike. And that's our goal in working closely together, is to provide products that speak seamlessly with each other in order to provide our clients with the highest levels of efficiencies. If you're someone that likes to read reviews, please do look us up on G2. A lot of great reviews out there from over 100 clients that testify to why we are the leaders in AP automation today. At the bottom, you'll see some of our core industries that we work with. If your organization is part of a different industry and you're interested in what you see today, please do reach out to Stephen or myself. We would be happy to evaluate with you and see if there's a fit. So before we jump into a demonstration, this is a high-level overview of some of the features that you'll find within Ottimate. Today, we're going to focus on our core accounts payable process, as well as vendor payments process. But you'll notice that we have three-way PO matching, instant capture. We also have an employee reimbursement tool. So if any of those features interest you, again, please do reach out to Stephen and/or myself, and we'd be happy to connect and dive a little deeper there. And with that, we'll go ahead and hand the screen share over to Laura Moulton to start our live demonstration.
So to get things started, here we're in the Ottimate system. We're on the home dashboard. So before I actually get into the whole invoice processing, I do want to help with getting your bearings on kind of where you are within the system. So up here on the left-hand side, this will be your North Star. So here you'll be able to see all your different subsidiaries or groupings, and then the different locations that roll up to these subsidiaries. So I'm a full administrator, just to keep in mind when I go through the demo today. So I have access to every subsidiary as well as location. So this is where you'd be able to see which locations are associated with this particular subsidiary. Now, it doesn't always make sense for every user to have full access into the whole platform. So you're actually able to manage in your settings what different types of permissions and also what locations people will have access to. So for instance, if I'm not supposed to be able to see these two locations, I could go ahead and turn those off and limit that visibility. You can also notice too, right, I have this role associated as a full administrator, and you can see some of the different types of permissions that are associated with this. But you can also manage and customize these roles as well. So if I go into the actual role here, for instance, you can see we have permissions that are specific for invoices, as well as statements, purchase orders, and vendor pay. So that way you can kind of manage and control, what permissions people have within the system. And you can essentially have unlimited number of users within the platform. But coming back into the home dashboard, so really the whole process, it starts off with getting invoices into our system. So you actually have 4 different means of being able to do this. So you'll see right here, you have a upload button where you can then just select a specific location. So if you have invoices that are on your desktop, you can just go ahead and drag and drop those into this box right here. Or if you wanted to, you could go ahead and search for your computer for those files. With a lot of clients, when they have, physical invoices, if they're scanning it and putting it onto their computer, that's one way of doing it. But the other option too is actually a scanned email. So you'll notice right here, I actually have a location-specific email address where invoices can be submitted to the system. So that's the second means to be able to get invoices in. Now, the third way of getting invoices into the system is actually through a mobile application. And with the process around using our mobile application, which is available both on the Android as well as the Apple Store. But essentially the process is kind of similar to if you're using your mobile banking to take a picture of a check, for instance. So with our mobile app, you're taking a picture of the invoice using the mobile app and submitting it into the system. So this is really helpful for a lot of people if they're out on the fly and they don't have time to, come to their desk, get the invoice and submit it into the system. The fourth means of upload is actually through an EDI feed. So we actually have relationships set up already with certain broadline vendors. And so essentially what the EDI feed means is that we're connecting straight with that vendor. We're taking in the invoices via the EDI feed or electronic data interchange feed. We're translating it from that feed and putting it into then a digital image for you guys to then see on your side when you're in the invoices tab. So that's the fourth means of upload. But coming into the actual invoices tab, so here you can think of this area as kind of your digital file cabinet, where you have this search bar up here. So if you wanted to look up a specific invoice, for instance, or by vendor name, or if you want to look up by line item, you could go ahead and use that search bar up there. But you also do have the filter invoice over here on the side. So if you wanted to kind of slice and dice the information as you guys see fit. But for invoices, the workflow is really going to be from kind of left to right. So if I actually go ahead and select for this specific location or this grouping, sorry, and go into, for instance, Cellarmark Brewing. So here we have an invoice that was submitted via the mobile application. And so we have the invoice image on the left-hand side, as well as the header information, as well as in the line item detail down there towards the bottom. So how did the invoice actually get to this stage? So it's actually gone through multiple layers of our system. So it's gone through OCR technology or optical character recognition. It's gone through AI, as well as machine learning. And then there is also a human in the loop function. And the human in the loop function is to kind of help with ensuring high accuracy rates. But our machine learning and our AI tool are really, really strong. And so the majority of our invoices actually don't even need to go to the human in the loop function. But the fields at which the layers of our system that I just mentioned, the fields at which they're picking up are the fields at which do not require judgment. So typically can be just read straight from this invoice right here. Now, when it comes to this particular invoice, we can see that it's already been coded. And the way that it's already been coded is that you can create rules for these different dimensions so that when an invoice comes in and it's meeting those specific rules, it'll then be able to apply that coding. But if you say, for instance, like, maybe there's no consistency with this particular line item, you could just say, hey, I don't need to actually create a rule. I need to always code this, for instance. So you have the line item detail here. And if I actually go into the account splits, you can see that not everything has been coded exactly the same. So if I wanted to have visibility into what those splits look like, I can see that on my account splits. With my approvals, I can also, there's two different types of approvals. So one that you can do is basically a on the fly or ad hoc. So if I needed to go ahead and add in Sarah Carter as well on this approval, I could go ahead and add her on the fly right there. But the other type of approval is more of a static or rule-based, where you can set conditions in your settings, and when invoices meet those conditions, it then has an automatically assigns like which approver is part of that approval process. I also have an audit trail on the invoice as well. So I have a sense of who uploaded the invoice and via what means. I can also see if there were any edits that were made on this particular invoice and by who and when. So I have that audit trail right there. I also can even flag invoices. So if I wanted to send a tag to Sarah and say, hey, can you please, take a second look at this? I can go ahead and send her a message right there, and then she'll get a notification via the mobile app as well as via email so that she can look at this invoice. I also even can add notes as well. And again, I have that same tagging functionality as well. So for invoices, the workflow is typically from left to right. So you do have a needs attention bucket. And so the needs attention bucket, well, invoices will land in here for a couple of different reasons. So it could land into this bucket if it's, for instance, a brand new vendor that we've never seen before and you need to complete the mapping process. Or if there are brand new line items on the invoice that we've never seen before and you need to start teaching those rules on how it needs to actually code this invoice going forward. Or if it's a potential duplicate, or if it's the digitization was not able to be completed because maybe it was a blurry submission of an invoice or crinkled up, or maybe it's missing details on the invoice. So those are a couple of reasons why it would land in a needs attention bucket, but essentially it's a flagging tool so that you guys can focus on how do you get it rectified and continue it on into the approval process. But here we've got an EDI invoice, and so we can see right here, we've got a couple of line items that have not been seen for this particular vendor. And so you need to teach that coding. So if I needed to go ahead and say, I'm going to put it to, food cost of sales. I'll use different, but again, I'll just be able to create different invoice. And so this is where I can create those mapping rules. So I can then assign if this is going to be a mapping rule for the entire company, or if it's just for this specific location, or if it's only for this invoice this one time, I don't actually need to create a rule. So if I'm just doing it for this particular invoice, and then again, I can go ahead and start to teach the coding on how it needs to do for the child dimensions as well. And then it can continue on into the approvals. So once invoices have gone through the approvals and they're into a fully approved state, at this point in time, this is when they're going to then land into the approved bucket. And this is when they're ready to then sync over into Intacct or into Sage 300. So it can be set up on a timer for how often that would be occurring. So some clients will want it at the end of the day. Others will want it a little more frequently. But what I always tell people is that if you ever find yourself in a point where you don't want to wait until the next scheduled sync, you can just select which invoices need to be pushed over into the system and be able to click export. And then once you click that export, it then will then create those open bills then in Intacct. But before I move on into talking about statements, I did also want to go over how to actually create approval policies so that you can kind of catch things before it actually gets into that point of time when it's syncing into the ERP. So when you're creating a policy, you would just go ahead and name your policy, and then you can go and say, okay, I'm going to have it for this specific location, for instance, or if I'm going to do it as a company or by grouping. But essentially all I would need to do is go ahead and select this particular location, and then I can set my condition. And this condition could be by vendor, it could be by dollar amount, if there's flags. This policy, what this means is that you can actually start to stack policies on top of policies. So the most common ask that people will have is they want to have a base policy that could be based off of department, for instance. So the facilities needs to review this invoice, and then if they create another policy on top of that where now it's a dollar amount, and so if it's over, say, $5,000, it now needs to be, the controller needs to be part of that approval process. But just to give you a sense of what some of those other types of conditions are, right, you can also do it based off of the dimensions that you have that are using in Sage, whether it's standard fields, custom fields, or user-defined dimensions. But in this location specifically, it's a construction location, so that's why we're seeing job, project, cost codes, and cost type. But for today's purposes, I'll create it for a dollar amount. And then I can go ahead and tie which approvers are a part of this approval policy. So I'll say I'm going to put Mark Hall, or I could put 2 people. Currently, I only have one of these, so only one of these 2 people needs to actually approve it. But I could make both of them. Or if I want to change this and actually put Sarah as a fallback approver, I could go ahead and do that. And then this way, by putting it as escalate after 4 days, I'm now giving Mark Hall 4 days to approve this invoice. And if he hasn't approved that within that 4 days, it then goes to Sarah Carter to approve. Because we don't want to have invoices getting stuck anywhere along in the approval process. So we want to get them approved in a timely fashion. So then it's just going to have you confirm the policy. And then once you go ahead and create your policy, it's now going to be then in your settings area. The other piece that I wanted to talk about is statements. So if you remember earlier, I was talking about how you can think of our system as kind of a digital file cabinet where we've got a collection of all of these invoices that have been processed through our system. And so we can also even ingest your vendor statements. And so this is really helpful for a lot of organizations where they talk about how statement reconciliation is a very manual and tedious process. And so sometimes they don't even have enough time to be able to go through this. But it's actually a really key and vital piece to finance. So Here we've got an example of a statement that's been digitized by our system. And then we have a list of the invoices that are on this statement. And so we're cross-referencing this against invoices that have already been received within our system. And we can also see too, we're flagging discrepancies between what the invoice is that's in our system versus what the statement is. But we're also highlighting, these are invoices that are currently missing from our system. So that way we can just make it really easy for you to go ahead and just email the vendor. And we're saying, hey, Mr. Vendor, we're missing these invoices from you currently. Please submit them to this email address so that we can get those into the system. So then once they go ahead and they submit those invoices, they'll get digitized and then they'll start popping up onto this vendor statement. But just say, for instance, you already have a copy of that invoice, it's just not within our system. You can go ahead and create an invoice right here. But once this statement has been reconciled, you can then go ahead, mark it as reconciled, and it'll move out of your unreconciled tab into reconciled. The next piece that I was wanting to talk about is actually vendor pay. So vendor pay, you can kind of think of this as kind of closing the loop on the bills, right? We've already created those open bill records in Intacct or in Sage 300, and now it's time to actually make those payments. So when I actually look at vendor pay and I look at this unpaid invoices, I think of this because it's going to tie back to the different permissions that you grant your different users. So I think of this as a user who has payment approval, but they're not the one that's actually going to be the final say on when the funds can actually leave the building. So here in the unpaid invoices, I could go ahead and I could select, which invoices I'm ready to pay. If I wanted to kind of change the view on this and kind of organize it a different way, I could look at it based off of location. This is super helpful because it gives you a sense of what the cash flow is out of each of these different locations. But if you also want to do it, you could do it by bank account or by company. But all I would really need to do is just select which of the invoices I'm ready to pay. So if I was told by my boss that I could pay, invoices up to, let's just say $7,000. Right now I can see I'm just under 7,000. So I'm okay to actually go ahead and schedule these. So then all I would need to do is I can then create, when I'm going to be setting those to be scheduled out. And I can do this up to a year in advance. And then by scheduling it now, it's going to then move into payment approval. So when it comes to payment approval, you can actually have approvals on payments and not just on invoices. So when it comes to the payment approval, you could create rules on whether it's going to be for certain payment methods, for instance, like if you needed to have ACH reviewed by a certain individual, or you could do it by bank account, or what's the most common one is going to be by dollar amount, right? If it's going to be over $15,000, that payment, the owner of the company needs to be part of that as final sign off or review. But I've scheduled those payments and then they're going to move into the approvals queue. So I can see right now I've got a couple of payments that are waiting for me to review. And if I wanted to, I could go ahead and click it and say, okay, why is this coming into my queue for me to review? Or if I wanted to actually click on the invoice itself to get more granular, I could go ahead and do that. And so I can see, okay, $922.93. Yep, that looks like it's what's been captured. And then I could go ahead and I could approve this payment. Or if I wanted to, and I wanted to do a bulk approval of multiple invoices, I could go ahead and select which invoices. And again, we're going to be totaling it up for you so you have a sense of what kind of the amount of money would be for these particular invoices. So once I approve them, if they needed to be approved by additional people, they would just move into pending approvals. And then once they're fully approved, they move into scheduled payments. And then once it reaches those due dates, that's when we're going to be executing out on those payments. And when it comes to the different payment methods that we support virtual cards, as well as ACH, and then checks. So with checks, that's where we're actually going to be cutting those checks, stuffing them into the postage, and actually shipping it out on your guys' behalf. But to give you guys a sense of what those actual look like from the vendor perspective. So here's an example of what that check would look like. And then this would be your guys' signature right there, as well as bank account. And then you would see, you know, which of the invoices are associated with this particular payment. And ACH, it's just missing that check, right? But you still have the remittance information so that they have an idea of what invoice they're being paid for. And then virtual card. So then they'd be able to click into the view card details to then be able to get that 16-digit code to use that virtual card. But coming back into the pending export. So when it comes to us actually executing out the payments to your vendors, it is going to be a one-to-one transaction of us pulling those funds. So what I mean by that is that, for instance, you've got two payments right here. One's for $500, the other one's for $1,000. So that's two different pulls of funds that we're pulling from the account. So one for $500 and the other for $1,000. So it just tends to make for a cleaner bank reconciliation process for people versus a lump sum of money being pulled out of their account. And then kind of the last piece to touch on, we do have these reports, and these are a couple of ones that are out of the box. So you can kind of filter if you wanted to look based off of reports that are for accounts payable, if you're going to be having admin reports, invoice reports, as well as payments or operational efficiency.
Awesome. So thank you, Laura, for taking us through that demonstration of the Ottimate platform. First through some of the AP workflows, approvals, users, as well as the general layout, how you can organize your company within Ottimate, and then the vendor pay as well. So thanks for that. And on the screen here, we've got just a few of our frequently asked questions. So I can leave those up for a second and let everyone read through those.
Thanks, Matt, too. And also at this time, we'll open up the chat option. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to write them in the question and answer box, or you can do the chat option and we'll read them out loud and I'll have Matt and Laura answer. I think that's all that came in. For all the questions that came in too, we'll follow up with you guys. Make sure you guys get the right answer. But from there, we'll go ahead and wrap up. So thank you guys for joining our webinar Wednesday. If you guys do have any additional questions, please contact your assigned account manager or email us at am@acumenfl.com. Also, if you're interested on a one-on-one demo or a 15-minute discovery call, then please let your account manager know and we will set that up for you. So as we wrap up, I just want to say thank you to the Ottimate team for the overview and live demonstration, and we hope to see you guys all again on our next webinar Wednesday.